Don, we're just doing trivia as a warm-up until you tell us it's time to start.
How many Activision games did you play?
Zero. How many Activision games or Atari games did Activision release? Well, zero.
Trick question.
Good question. I don't know. How many Atari 2600 games were made by Atari? 150? I don't know. How many ET were sold in the first month?
How many were actually kept?
They built, it's very different numbers. I heard either 4 million or 8 million that they built, and they sold 1 million in the first month, and zero.
Welcome, guys. Here we have Keithen Hayenga, David Crane, Steve Woita, Bob Smith, and Bob Polaro. They're going to talk about Atari programming.
That's it?
Short and sweet. I'm going to start. Looking at us here, it looks like we represent kind of 3 eras of the early Atari, with Dave being the very first, and Bob and I are kind of in the second group, and Keithen and Steve in the third.
We're the scabs.
So Dave should probably start it off since he's the most ancient one.
Most ancient one, thank you very much. I recently received a Pioneer Award from at DICE. What was the group? AIAS. And, you know, when you're called a pioneer, that's almost bad as ancient one. I mean, you know, I did not start the company from a cover by. But anyway. Well, if we're going to go chronologically, then we should start with how we all got to Atari. Be a reasonable start. I was working in National Semiconductor as a technician in the chip department, chip design department. We were making integrated circuits. And I actually took that job out of college because I had no experience with chip design in college. And I wanted to learn about that field, so I took a job in it. It was something I'd never done before, and I can learn anything somebody puts on me, so I just do that. But I also have played tennis all my life, and I was playing tennis at an apartment complex in Sunnyvale with Al Miller, who was working at Atari at the time. And he came in to the pro shop after the tennis match, and he said, "Listen, guys, read this ad that I wrote for the newspaper, advertising for programmers to program video games for Atari. Proofread it for me." And I read the ad and actually said, "Well, gee, this sounds like a fun job. I'm pretty well done with what I was doing at National Semiconductor. I've learned everything I wanted to learn." So that night, about 8 o'clock, I went back to National, where I had built a computer. The first computer used in the lab I had actually built using one of their microprocessors. And I had a word processor program that I wrote on that computer, wrote up a resume on that word processor, printed it out, had an interview at Atari, 10 a.m. the next morning, got a phone call at 2 p.m. with a job offer, and let my boss know I was leaving in 2 weeks. So in less than a 24-hour period, I read this ad and said, sure, why not? I'll play design video games. And I was working with the original group there, which was Al Miller, Larry Kaplan, Bob Whitehead, Larry Wagner, Joe DeCure, who was the chip designer, was also doing a little programming. But it was certainly the original group. They'd been working on it for about 6 or 7 months. Anybody else?
By the way, those 4 guys, Al Miller, Dave Crane, Bob Whitehead, and Larry Kaplan, sold a fantastic 4. They were the senior designers and store backers. Anyway, I was working at Commodore games on their Commodore PET computer, the little chiclet keyboard. And I was doing a blackjack game. One of the owners at the time, his name was Chuck Peddle. He was an avid Reno gambler, and my game didn't do split, so they fired me. So I ended up looking for work, and I noticed an ad in the paper for Atari, and they wanted game designers there. So I sent a resume, and it turned out that they were just starting up the Atari 800 project. And it was kind of similar to the Commodore PET that I was working on. So I started to do all these basic games on there, lemonade stand, and all those kind of things. And then it turned out that they had enough for their catalog, so they said I had to start voting up on the Atari 2600. So I started to learn that using my limited assembly knowledge from college. And I was able to get some screens running and ended up doing some 2600 games. So I was there for about 6 years.
Oh, let's see, I came out of left field. I'm probably the only non-engineer here. I'm a hobbyist, major into this. So I'm undegreed. I built trimarans in the South Bay, built a dome in New Mexico, decided I liked computers, and taught myself how to program. Sold my first game of creative computing in '78, I guess it was. And on the basis of that, I walked into Atari and said, "You should hire me. I sold the game." Why not be hired? At the time, I had a young family. I was looking for a job, and I had two job offers. I had one from a Swiss power grid company who wanted me to program their power grid for them, and I had an offer from Atari. And the Swiss people were saying, "We're so stable. You'll never have to worry about not having a job. If you go to Atari, they're going to lay you off next year." Well, I went to Atari, I went back, and I've never had to work for that. So that's how I wound up there.
Okay, I guess I was the next one at Atari. I started out working at Apple right out of Cal, and Woita and I were back in the lab, and he kept asking questions of people like Andy Hirschfeld and Bill Budge about how you program this or that. And then he and I would get together and say, "Oh, I could do that." So he and I had come up with this agreement to build a thing called the Joyport, that you use Atari game controllers on an Apple II, or multiple joysticks, so you can have like 4 people playing. So to sell the Joyport, I did a game called Computer Foosball. So I was another of those experienced game programmers, and I was also part of the San Francisco Apple Corps, and we had the assembly language group. And one of the guys in the assembly language group was a guy named Don Kaiser, who became one of the managers at Atari. And when you get together for the assembly language group, most of the guys there wanted to learn assembly language so they could break the copy protection on games. That's what they were really there for. And I was there teaching John how to do loops and stuff like that, so he actually knew I could program. So when he was at Atari, he kept calling me up, because now I'm an experienced game programmer, and so they had me come in after these guys had founded Activision and iMagic. And Steve, who was in the lab, I'll let you talk more.
Yeah, I'm Steve Woita, and I was in the lab. So I always wanted to program my video games. I was like 17 when I got Atari at the time. And so when I had a job at Apple, out of college, I met Keith. And following up on his story, he got picked up at Atari, and I said, "God, that sounds really cool. We should stop by and possibly interview them." So interviewed with a guy named Rob Sedibble down there. And back up a little bit, Apple said, "Go ahead, interview there if it works out. If you like it, go for it. If you end up with a job there and you don't like it, you can come on back." And I was like, "Oh, great, so I can't lose." I should have stayed a little longer at Apple when the stock purchase went, but that's their story. But anyway, so I ended up at Atari, and my first project was supposed to be on the 2200. had a lot of bitmap experience at that point, but at least moved around one. And I said, well, why would I want to work with 200 when there's 25 million, 26 million out there? So Don Kaiser, the guy that hired Keith, was not close over that. Threw down the 2600 manual connections and go ahead and figure it out. And that was pretty much it. And he kind of forgot about me and just kind of worked on games and did what I wanted back then. Because then I could go back to Apple. So that was kind of how I got involved with Atari. And, I mean, usually what we do at this point is kind of like throw, I don't know if you guys feel good about this one where they can ask questions about that or anybody care.
I mean, let me just expound. You heard two people in this group say that they had designed a video game before applying for Atari. And you can't even imagine what that meant to Atari. Because there were, at the time, maybe 15 people in the world who had. So you walk into Atari and say, well, here's a game I did. Okay, you got a job. I mean, come on. We're talking about experience. Nobody else did that.
Yeah, those were awesome interview experiences, by the way. Very loud. Now it's like, wow.
Steve last night was talking about when he came in for his interview, and we had Howard wandering down the hall with his bullwhip tracking it. So it was a very interesting place to go to.
The contrast coming from Apple, which was very conservative at the time, and then going over to Atari and Sunnyvale and interviewing, and just all of a sudden hearing the bullwhip cracks, and I didn't even know where it was coming from, but I was just coming into the lobby, and then I see Howard with a hat around the corner, and he was finishing off Raiders of the Lost Ark. He really got into character quite often.
One of the most difficult things that this industry has dealt with, and many industries have dealt with, is how to manage a creative/technical project. They've tried many different ways, but what's always proven to be the best is if the person doing the work is self-motivated and really wants to make the best game they've ever made, they're going to work 12, 14 hours a day, overnight if necessary, and be working at it. And so that's why the Atari and subsequently the Activision feeling of working seems so nice. It's because you were put in a position of trust. We're giving you this job because we trust that you can make a video game without us having to stand over you with a whip and clock you in and out every day and make sure that you're presenting certain deliverables by certain times. These days, it isn't like that anymore because you've got 100 people working on a project sometimes, and there are entire gaggles of administrators watching for deliverables, watching for budgets, watching for this, watching for that. But back then, if you could demonstrate that you could make a video game really on your own anyway, you might as well come in and do it in the halls of Atari. Do it for us.
And leave the money there.
Leave the money there.
Well, go ahead and, if you guys want to start asking questions, that usually works out pretty good. Hey, you, that's not raising your hand.
How is it determined which games you work on? Like, Bob, did you request to do Defender, or did they assign it to you, or how did that work?
That was plum.
Well,
Who's the best Defender player?
well, actually, I was starting to work on Defender, and then they came out with the royalty program and everything, and I don't know if you can hear me. But,
I can hear you.
I'll
can you
translate.
hear me with them? Okay, so I was already starting to work on Defender, and then Todd Fry was working on Pac-Man at the time, and marketing, and my boss came up to me and said, "You want to work on Pac-Man and have Todd work on Defender?" And I said, "Well, I already started it, so I didn't do it." So I couldn't work on Pac-Man, but I ended up with Defender. I like the way it turned out, but it wasn't a Pac-Man.
How did it feel to see your game on a postage stamp?
Well, that took me by surprise because I didn't know they were going to do that. I see it on there and I said, they could have put a lot of games on there, but they picked that one. I guess it was in the 80s. Yeah, I'm kind of glad that you ran out of those stamps.
From your perspective, from being employees of Atari, what mistakes were made in the management of the company as to why it couldn't continue into the 80s to be an equivalent of Nintendo or Sega or something along those lines as the video game industry progressed into the 80s and beyond?
I gave you an answer about that last night.
Indirectly.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm hoping Dave can translate.
Well, we could start with Burlington Mills,
Yeah.
which is where the CEO came from. He knew nothing about games, knew nothing about the industry, but he figured a CEO is a CEO is a CEO. That was probably one of the big problems.
That goes back to the issue that I mentioned just a couple minutes ago. Managing a creative process is extremely difficult. This goes further in the future, but at Activision, we actually figured out a way to do it that has become a case study in business school, which we created what we call design centers, where you put 4 or 5 people who know their skills, and you put them together in a room and they self-police. Basically, you'll see something on the screen, and if you don't like it, you'll tell the guy that you can do better than that. And so it's managed from within by keeping small groups together. But Atari had to grow, and they were purchased by Warner Communications. And Warner Communications is a structured company. They wanted to have a professional CEO, so first they moved Nolan out, and then they moved the people that Nolan put in out, and brought in Ray Kassar from Burlington Industries. And he was asked in an interview once, do you know how to manage creative people? And he said, absolutely. I manage towel designers at Burlington Industries. The process of making a video game is very much both left and right brain. You have to do extremely creative things while doing tremendously technical things, particularly with the 2600. I mean, the hoops we had to jump through just to put a pixel on the screen on the 2600 was insane. And when I'm designing a video game, I mean, I'm God. I mean, I'm creating a world. I'm creating every bit of physics, if there are physics in the game. I got 2 objects. They don't bounce off of one another unless you tell them to. They overlap unless you collide them. So you have to keep thousands of details in your mind at one time, or the end product isn't going to work. You're going to do something, 3 screens down that completely screws up what you did on the first screen, or whatever. You have to keep them all together. So these were not towel designers. These were not people who were, all just design. And he didn't get that. He didn't get the combination of technical and creative skills necessary. So that's just the basic problem. I mean, there were lots of other things that went wrong, of course, but one big problem I remember Atari had was because this management was so out of touch, the upper management, middle management didn't even talk to upper management. Engineering didn't talk to marketing. When the Atari 800 was being engineered, Atari was creating the coolest game system that the engineers could think of. And management thought they were making an Apple II clone. They thought they were making the next home computer. And so they'd go in a meeting and say, all right, so it's going to balance your checkbook? And the engineer said, yeah, I can do that. It's going to do this? Yeah, I can do that. But they were just back there making a video game system with, more colors and more pixels and more display capability, more sprites, all those things. They're making a video game. So it's kind of hard for a company to succeed when management thinks you're doing one thing and engineering thinks you're doing another, and whatever comes out is what you get.
I actually want to expand on this also. So I mentioned Howard before. He's writing a book or an article on what happened, about the bubble that burst and stuff like that. And he sent around a questionnaire asking us, when did we know that the bubble had burst? And my reply was, I actually didn't. I thought that we had our management problems. Kaplan had come back to us, and I thought we would be saved, and we weren't. But I was thinking that we didn't get to make the quality games we wanted to because the pressure was keep the ROM size down because that saves us money. And I thought these guys at Activision and iMagic, they got bigger ROMs, they did better graphics. I expected video games to keep going on because they had quality. And so I was quite surprised that we had a bubble that burst. But for us, it was that management angle.
Well, the bubble's a different issue. I mean, really, Atari's problems were bigger than the bubble. But just to go into the bubble, I mean, everybody remembers that the video game business crashed in 1984. Okay. And we were at Activision at the time, and our first indication, we saw it but didn't realize it because we went to a CES. Every 6 months we went to a trade show at CES, showed our games. And we went to a CES and looked at the book, and there was now a video game category. You know, there's televisions and this, that, and video games. And there were 30 companies, well, 30 more companies in the video game business that 6-month period that had not been in the business the previous 6-month period. They saw all the successes, the money that we were making in the business, and said, well, I can do that. All I need is a couple programmers and some venture capital money, and I can compete. They didn't realize how hard it is to make a video game and how hard it is to make one good. So we looked at that and we said, you know, none of these companies are going to be in business a year from now. Literally, we said that to each other. We didn't go on to say, my God, what is that going to do to the business? Because what happened was every one of these companies hired a couple programmers off the street, they made a couple video games, they built 1 million of them, and they went to Toys R Us and said, I got a new video game for you. And Toys R Us said, we'll take a few, if they sell, we'll take more, and they didn't sell. And 30 companies ended up with 1 million cartridges in their warehouse sitting there gathering dust. And some enterprising, we call them bottom feeders, came in and had a brilliant idea. They went to the bankruptcy trustees and they said, I will pay you $3 a piece for those video games. They turned around to the retailers, Toys R Us, TV, everybody who was out there and said, I will sell these video games to you for $4 a piece, and you can retail them for $5 a piece. Everybody's making a 20% margin on this, except of course the venture capitalists who lost their shirts because they were only getting $3 a game. And for the next Christmas, almost 0 new games, frontline products sold from any of our companies because kids asked Dad, say, hey Dad, I want to buy that latest game from Activision, that $40 game. It just came out. That's what I want for Christmas. So Dad takes $40 into the store. Before he can get 3 steps into the store, there's a big cardboard barrel full of video games, $5 each. And he says, you mean I can buy 8 of these for my $40 and be a hero to my kids? He never made it past the barrel to look at the new games. So there were 20 million games sitting in those barrels that Christmas. 20 million cartridges that had to sell through before we could sell a single brand new game. Which is why companies were going out of business right and left, not having any revenues. That's the bubble, and that's what happened.
Yeah, I often wonder what would have happened, at least for Atari, not really trying to make games based on all the licenses that were kind of forced on us. I mean, I was always trying to do a game that was not a license-based game. And a lot of people were like, you know, power-oriented, really supreme titles to choose from. One was, you know, Raiders and E.T. and all that. But these timelines that they had that were really strict. And I often wondered if we were operating more like Activision, where we were creating more original content that wasn't tied to licenses, how that would have panned out. You just got to think of that.
Well, the history of Atari and video games. The Atari 2600 was designed and built to be cartridge programmable. Plug a different cartridge in, you get a different game. For really so that it could play Tank and Pong, 2 of their hottest games. The hardware is designed. There's the Tank hardware and there's a little extra Pong hardware. And this really was designed to play one specific game, and then they threw in the ball so that you could have smooth motion for Pong. So their logic was they were a successful arcade company. Pong started out in the arcades, as you recall, and eventually there was a home version that you could send. Well, they had all these arcade games. They wanted to be able to have a home system to sell their arcade hits, their licensed equivalent, sell their arcade hits into the home. So that's what Atari started out doing. Every game that we were looking at had to be an Atari arcade game that they already owned, make a home version for it. And Al Miller did Surround, and there's Air Sea Battle, which was patterned after something very similar in the arcade. And Tank, of course, was the Combat. Combat was the arcade game Tank. One of my first efforts was Canyon Bomber and Depth Charge, which I was pretty proud of. In a 2K by 2600 cartridge, I put two $4,000 arcade games. But that's the impetus was, take our arcade games and put them in the home. So that went on for several years. There were a lot of arcade games. So that was the drive. It was hard for us to say, but I have an original idea at Atari. They said, well, yeah, we got all these arcade games, and they are pre-sold titles. When you walk into a game store and you have a 2600 and you see Canyon Bomber, and you say, well, I played that in the arcade and I enjoyed it. You're going to buy the game. So that's a marketing hook, pre-sold. Eventually, we ran out of arcade games to make into home games, and that's when we started doing original concept. When we went to Activision, we didn't own any arcade games, so everything had to be original. And our CEO, Jim Levy, was a marketing genius. And I can't fault people for licensing a movie title or something for marketing purposes. You want to do it because you see the name and you say, well, I enjoyed that in the theater, I'm going to enjoy the video game. But it's actually a crutch to marketing. It's a shortcut. If I pay that licensing fee, I buy the goodwill the movie generated for my marketing. Well, Jim Levy was a marketing genius. He didn't need that. He figured out ways that he could take an original concept and market it really well. So we just stuck with original concepts at Activision because A, we didn't own any arcade games, and B, we didn't need the marketing hook.
How do you think it would have turned out otherwise? I know that's...
Well, I did at least one, I did a couple, games based on other properties, Ghostbusters, Transformers, probably others that I can't think of.
But back in that other time frame.
Well, it's a little later. And we just looked at it, we went at it with a different mindset. We said we are not making a game about a movie. We're going to make an original game concept that could be called anything, but it's enough in the same genre as the movie we can put the name on it.
And then you release it when it's done, you're not forced to...
Exactly.
To a movie time, so it's a big deal, I think.
Yeah, that is something that we just should always stress. We laugh about the ET sales and landfills and all that kind of stuff, but when you're making a video game, video games have to sell next Christmas. Whenever you're being developed, it's not so much anymore. There's sales all year round, but back then, it was a Christmas product. I mean, you had to have your video game done by Christmas, which means to manufacture the ROMs, get it all done, you had to have it done by September. So if a movie comes out and is successful, you have very little time to capitalize on that success before people completely forget about it and it's not worth anything. So if you buy a license to a movie after it's already out, the amount of time you have to finish a game is insane. And every one of those games that we talked about had 6 weeks instead of 6 months to make a game. And that's really why they didn't succeed. They weren't very good because they didn't have the time to be good.
What role do you see the individual developer playing now? And do they have opportunities to be the God character that you spoke about earlier? Do you think that there's still an opportunity for up-and-comers to build companies like like Activision in the 80s?
I'd like to respond if I could. I've been working on DSI all by myself with an artist and a sound guy for the last probably 6 years. Handhelds, iPod, those kinds of things are well within reach of single development. You know, provided there's someone to provide assets, of course. And it's always nice to have a publisher and testers and all the rest of the rigmarole that goes along with development. But I've been on my own for 10, 12 years now. And am I making a lot of money? No, but it's a living. And I'm enjoying what I'm doing, of course. So yes, I do think that that's kind of come full circle.
Well, direct marketing of games to consumers makes that possible. I mean, obviously, you can put an app in the App Store without being a publisher, without having a publisher. Of course, it's hard to get recognized with 250,000 apps out there without having the marketing machine behind the games as well. But that's one direction, and that's the small direction. He mentioned the A word, Activision of today. And if you're going to be involved, it's like asking, you know, can I, working from my home, make the movie Avatar? You know, yeah, you've got 7,000 years. You know, you can do it yourself. You've got all the skills. You really have everything you need to do for all that, probably. Video games from the big publishers like Activision are very similar. I mean, hundreds of people working on them, and every one of those people has to have a particular role and have to be managed so that they're doing it's really very much like the movie industry. I mean, if you have carpentry skills and you want to make movies, you can. You can go and work for Paramount Pictures and build sets. And you're on the credits, you know. As long as you have a specialty, you can do that. But long gone is the days, really, where a console game can be done as we were doing it, with one man, one game. With all the art, the graphics, the design, the sound effects, all that being done by one person. That's, of course, long gone, even on the iPhone.
Yeah, marketing's a big deal now if you're doing this single development thing, sole developer deal. That's what I'm trying to figure out right now, but marketing's a big issue in order to get seen. Release a really good game on the iPhone or the iPad, and no one's going to know about it. You have some sort of marketing behind it. And so marketing to me right now means way more now than it did back then. And just now that the playing field is flat out, everybody can do these developments. They got all kinds of good tactics out there, so you got to be able to somehow guerrilla market your stuff. So it's kind of new for me.
I did a game on the Commodore 64 about 20 years ago, the lithography, and I developed and published it myself, and didn't do that great, but at least it got out there. And recently, a few months ago, a friend of mine called me up and said, hey, why don't you put that game on a cell phone? And I said, oh, okay, well, which one? And he said, well, the iPhone has about 400,000 apps out there now, so it would probably get lost out there. And I already had a BlackBerry Storm, so I figured, well, how can I get it on this phone? He said, well, there's a development tool called Flips. So I went downloaded that, it was free, and then I worked on it, and I had to go through all these forms to figure out how to do it. And I finished it a few weeks ago and found out where app stores to put it on. The first one was Fandango. They wanted a whole bunch of insurance to pay out in case they get sued for neighbors. So I went with another one called Mo by Hand, and within 2 days I had it published. So it's a lot easier to get a game out there now as a sole developer than it was in the old days. As far as marketing and getting money on it, it's a different ballgame. It's easy to get something out there. You just have to have an idea that you believe in.
So it's great if you're already rich.
the DPC chip, for those who don't know, is a second chip in the cartridge. There's always been a ROM in the cartridge. This, it had the ROM built into it, didn't it? So it was one single chip, but it was 1982, 3-ish, and the 2600 had lasted years longer than we thought. There were so many millions of them out there, and people were still buying games that I thought, you know, we're seeing competition from other gaming systems. We can still sell games on the 2600, but we're going to have to start making them better technologically. And we were limited to the technology that was in the box. You bought the box, and then all you were getting typically from the cartridge was the ROM. So knowing how to write kernels, the display kernels, a very complicated way to make a display on the 2600, I said, what can I do? What kind of hardware assist can I give the program that makes it easier to write kernels, gives me more cycles, therefore more things I can do, etc. And I just sat down and said, all right, if I had these kind of registers, I can do this, and that kind of register, I can do that. And I designed the functionality of this chip that had program ROM, graphics ROM, hardware assist, all that sort of thing. And we hired Jesse Cable, who was, he was kind of the 6502 guru. He was making 6502 clone circuits, microprocessor circuits for lots of other companies. Once I guess the patents ran out, everybody could make one, so he was doing all the stuff. So yeah, we hired him to do the chip design on my block diagram design. And it was really a pretty cool chip. I mean, one of the things you have to do to write a display kernel is you are changing the hardware every horizontal scan line as it goes down the screen. So you really only deal with one horizontal line, and then the program has to do something different on the next horizontal line all the way down. You're making decisions about when things have to be displayed, what graphics get displayed, and those decisions are being made in real time and take a lot of code cycles to run. So I figured out ways to save a whole bunch of cycles and make the whole thing much faster. Gave me the ability to put more colors on the screen, more objects on the screen, lots more stuff. And then just for fun, one of the things that the 2600 was not very good at was sounds and music. So just for fun, I built a 3-part harmony music system that you could also do. So Pitfall 2 was the first game that had a running score. It actually had orchestral music in it. And that was using the 3 channels of audio from the DPC. And the only thing it used the Atari audio hardware for was a snare drum, because Atari had a good weight noise generator. So, you know, there was a long design process. Probably took a year of the chip design, maybe a combination of a year between the circuit design and the chip design. And we brought them out, and I did Pitfall 2 to utilize all the capabilities and had grand plans for using that going forward. But at the same time, it added $1 to the cartridge because it had a custom integrated circuit in it. $1 hard cost, which means it had to be sold for $3 or $4 more at retail. And the video game business was in the process of collapsing in 1984, and I was doing it in 1983. So no game was ever done after that. The most amazing thing is the 2600 emulators that probably some of the people in this room have worked on. When I first heard that these emulators were correctly emulating the DPC chip, I was astounded.
I remember reading in the early Atari 2600 catalogs that there was like a secret location hidden somewhere in California where games were being developed or devised. Was there really such a secret location in the mountains of California?
That was probably the great, Atari had Grass Valley.
Well, first of all, that was marketing.
But as far as it was told to me, it was the Grass Valley, but that was the secret. and ideas would come down from there. But generally, they were handheld ideas, or I think the first hologram game came down from Grass Valley. But it into a lot of 2600 idea generation.
A bunch of the early engineers moved out into the country, and Grass Valley. Who was out there? It was Steve. Steve.
The name's all escaping.
I didn't know where Grass Valley was. I thought it was in Santa Cruz.
That direction.
I don't know how many of you were around, some of you were around for the 800. Looking at the 8-bit marketing, depending on when marketing came out, it was either sold as this business computer with the 815 drive, or it was sold as this home productivity education system, or sold as a game system. We talked about the schizoid marketing of Atari earlier. How did that come down to the engineering? Wrenched off one project, dropped on another one, depending on who was in charge of marketing.
I think a running joke, we would stop each other in the hall and tell each other it's a small business.
There is one other thing to mention too. We did have separate divisions. So for instance, I worked on the 5200, which was basically 800 hardware, but we did things enough different that we had different development teams. And not until very near the end, when we actually put all the game programmers together, was there like any cooperation at all. So the people that were working with Atari Basic and stuff like that, never saw them. They were in another world. But I do remember Moon was the VP that was saying that we taught Steve Jobs everything he knows, so it'll be easy for us. So yeah, there you go.
Yeah, Michael was a pretty boy VP.
Well, that guy. Well, if that was the case, if Atari taught Steve Jobs everything, you know, I remember a trade show where we had a game that wasn't ready to show, and they were using an Apple II under the kiosk to simulate the screen. but to answer your question, further, every division was very separate, and engineering was made up of all of the chip designers that had been making the Atari 2600 chips, that had been making the Video Olympics chips, the video pinball chips, and all of the chip designers. And so they were doing their thing. Nobody understood, nobody in management understood what they were doing anyway. So they weren't being told what to do. They were just creating this great new chipset that was going to go into the 800 and eventually into the 5200. And then focus groups, testing, and that sort of thing. Everybody says, well, it's a small business computer. It's going to need more than just a cassette storage, mass storage device, audio cassette system. So they set up a different group to create the 1541 disk drive, another group to create the printer. Apple, with their Mac and Laser Writer, proved that to be a true business software computer, it's all about the peripherals. It's not about the computer. I mean, that first image writer was really pretty cool, and you could actually print things that were somewhat attractive. And then they came up with Laser Writer, which leapfrogged that. When I was showing the 800, standing around trade shows, doing my duty, showing what it could do, the company line was, be sure to tell them how it's a business computer, and it's, so somebody, this 18-year-old girl walked up to me once, so what does it do? I said, well, you can balance your checkbook. I don't want to balance my checkbook. What else can it do? And I tried the company line, and I said, well, it plays great games. And that's really what it did.
Do you still play games now? And if so, do you play classic ones, or do you do current ones?
All for me. I played Majesty and Heroes of Might and Magic 4. Those are the games that I play.
I play Scrabble or something.
I play 12.
Yeah, and I've got some casual games that when my wife doesn't take my iPhone, I can play.
A casual game, that's an interesting term. We all hear it bandied about. That's all we did in the 80s. I mean, every game was a casual game. It also happened to be the hardest core games there were. so they were also the hardcore games. But it was never, in my opinion, a good thing that console games kept going harder core into smaller and smaller niche markets. I mean, a lot of those games were selling to 8% of the consumers and leaving everybody else behind. But the Atari 2600 was in the living room with the family. And, we even had 2-player games back then where dad and the kid could play together. And in fact, one of the last things they added to the 2600 console was the difficulty switches. They had left and right difficulty switches, A and B. You know why they put those in there? We had to write a game that had an easy mode and a hard mode, or a handicap for one player or the other. And that was to handicap dad playing kid. Going about 3 weeks later, they were switching it the other way.
Sorry, I don't know. Anybody in that area?
You've mentioned before that it was obviously quite different programming for the 2600 compared to a modern console or machine. Is there any particular programming technique or challenge that kind of sticks out that you went, I never thought I'd be able to do that, but I did it in the end?
A programming technique. I can hear it.
Oh, sorry. I said obviously programming 2600 was substantially more difficult than programming today, a game. And was there any particular algorithm or technique that you never thought you'd be able to do, but actually were able to do it on the 2600?
For me, I think the top 6 barrier. Well, I was going to say, there was one thing I was left with. I had an 8-character controller kernel going, and the next thing I wanted to do was get it moving, and then they let us all do it. I was doing that, I was trying to work that into our 600 sets. I was really happy about getting that to roll, and then I never really saw it through the way I wanted it to. There's a 6-character kernel.
Well, this may sound like a product plug, but last Christmas, I decided I was actually going to take a couple weeks off of programming games and have a Christmas vacation. And yet, the next morning I get up and I walk on my computer and it's sitting at it anyway. I've got to check email. And I was remembering so many of those techniques that you might be suggesting, just programming techniques that I would have to spend 45 minutes explaining the background to it for me to say, and here's the technique that was needed. The detail that we had to put into those 2600 games was so amazing. And I thought, I'm probably going to die next week, and nobody will know how this was done anymore. So I set out and I actually did 2 iPhone products. The first one that I did was called Dragster Magic, and it is the magic programming techniques that were used to create the game Dragster. And in it I explained the 6-digit score kernel, I have little animated demos to show exactly how the whole thing, all the thinking behind it and all that. And then I looked at that and I said, nobody who hasn't programmed 2600 is going to have a clue what I'm talking about. So I did a prequel to it called 2600 Magic, and it shows a lot of the odd techniques we had to go through. And if you have any interest in that question that you just asked, those 2 products, get the 2600 first and understand all that, and then the Dragster Magic, and you'll see the nonsense that we had to go through. It was just astounding. The 6-digit score kernel they're talking about is the 2600 hardware. How much time do we have? The 2600 hardware was designed to put 2 tanks on the screen shooting missiles at each other, and a very low resolution play field which would look like brick walls that you could drive around. You remember the game Combat, the tank game. That's all it was designed to do. 2 8-bit sprites on the screen. But through a bunch of just almost mistakes in the hardware, they could, for example, if you look at your Combat cartridge, they have these situations where you've got a squadron of 3 biplanes flying across the screen and you're shooting at each other. Well, those are actually just replications of the same hardware. It's got the same graphics in it. And they just look the same. There's 3 of them. And you got these 3 things flying around. Well, because the hardware was capable of putting 3 objects out horizontally like that, and because our code was running synchronously with the television scan line, every pixel is being scanned, our code knew where we were, and we could change the hardware in between scanned pixels. because of that, we could take those 3 biplanes, so this would be a biplane, this would be a jet, this would be a tank, if we wanted to. We could actually change the graphics. Now they had to move together because they were just a hardware anomaly, but we could change the graphics. So when we started out with the games, if you remember, there was a 2-digit score up in the upper left-hand corner and a 2-digit score in the upper right-hand corner made out of the big, chunky, brick-like bits. And we started doing games when we wanted to have more score. One of the first things we had to do is a 6-digit score display. And we always have to explain this is counting on our fingers. We took one of the objects, put 3 of them, took the other object like this, now there's 6 of them. And if you can figure out how to change each one of them across a horizontal scan line going at 15,000 frames a second, scans a second, you can figure out how to write those pixels in the exact time, you can make 6 different digits on the screen. And there were some real obscure tricks you had to do that. In fact, for the first 2 years, nobody believed it was possible. We saw the VDL trick. But, so that was astounding to be able to take hardware that was only designed to do 2 tanks and now have 6 complete high-resolution digits of score. But that's not enough. That's why there's Dragster Magic. I took that same thing and I moved it. So now, as it's moving across the screen, since I have to synchronously write these pixels at a certain time, my code has to change with the position of the object. And that's where it starts to blow people's minds. That's just one thing. Like the car in Grand Prix was at least as hard. The fact that there are 2 chickens on the screen in the freeway is a nightmare. Because you've got all the other cars going on, and now how do I do all the cars and write left chicken, right chicken, and decide where the heights are, you know? It was a puzzle every single day. We would stare at the screen. That's why it took 6 months to do a game that, honestly, freeway, you could do in a day, you know, using today's tools. But those programming techniques are lost forever, most likely. But yeah, if you're interested in them, I'll plug my $2 products.
As a slight follow-up, is there any chance that you'll port those over to other phones?
To some phone other than iPhone?
Yeah.
Not likely. In fact, everybody's asking me, you sort of promised one for Pitfall and Grand Prix, and when are you going to get to those? Never.
David, are you aware that the source code of Freeway is available on the internet?
The source code?
Yes.
No, I haven't noticed that.
I know I was reverse engineered it to create the entire.
Oh, you reverse engineered, it wasn't some listing lifted out of Atari?
No, but it's completely commented and everything's explained.
Cool.
I leaked Dragonfire probably 6 years ago, so the source for Dragonfire is out there as well. And I did try to keep all the comments, even though I had to almost retype all the sources. At least I kept all my machine cycle notes in my kernel, so you know what cycle of the scan line you're on.
How many people were actually writing 2600 games?
Oh, what was the culture like under Nolan Bushnell? There's been like legends that it was like extremely wild. Is that true or?
Yes.
No. I was pretty early at Atari, but there were, Atari was around for a couple of years before me, and a lot of legends come from before my time. Hot tub parties in the lobby and drugs running rampant. And when I was there was not even any drug use. There was not pot being smoked in the offices. It happened after the fact, I know it was quite a bit. But I wasn't looking over that direction. There are a few legends, but I think a lot of it is misplaced. The work was so hard, it was very rewarding and very enjoyable, but you had to be a puzzle palace person. I mean, you really had to enjoy this stuff. And so everybody was working really hard. Nolan, on the other hand, had sold the company. He got $26 million in cash from Warner Communications, and that's in 1970, whatever, $26 million, a lot of money. And he bought a big mansion up in Woodside, and we would have planning parties with planning events where we would go in there and we'd either hang out in his theater room or in his ice cream soda fountain parlor that he built outside the theater room, you know. So it wasn't corporate culture by any means, but I think that a lot of the drug culture and all has been overstated in my opinion.
I know all you guys were on the consumer side. You were talking about what caused the bubble to burst on the consumer side. What do you think it was on the arcade side that caused everything to collapse around the same time?
The arcade side is still around. I mean, they're still making, Atari's still making arcade games. So that, yeah.
Yeah, but think back to the 70s. I mean, you would hang out in an arcade and do 1,000 people. I mean, you know, certainly I think as a social gathering point, hasn't been the same for a number of years. I don't know, I'd be guessing, but at the time, you could get entertainment out of an arcade game that you couldn't get at home. Pretty soon, the home games were meeting or exceeding arcade games, so that might be the death of the arcade.
I think he's right. After the Magic went south, I hid out in Point Out for a while. And basically, they just weren't getting the kind of quarters that they were at the beginning. The games were getting a lot more expensive, and there was a lot less traffic in arcades.
What were you folks thinking at the time while you're making these games? I don't see how you could possibly envision that people would want to play your games 25 years later. I assume that you think, well, my game's going to hopefully have its day in the sun, and that'll be that. But it didn't happen. It turned out not to be disposable entertainment. What's that like?
Well, it was disposable for a period of time, then it came back. I mean, my biggest, regret about this whole video game business is you can spend 5,000 hours making a game and its shelf life is 3 months. You put a game out there and it's going to sell for a few months, and then somebody walks in the store and says, I saw that last month, I'm not going to buy it. You know, it's astounding that happens, but it's absolutely true. But a game that did well enough and was successful enough comes back in the classic gaming movement, and that's really cool. I mean, that's why we're here. We think it's a neat thing.
Definitely never thought it would happen.
Yeah, I actually wanted to say that the thought process was very different from that. I was trying to make games I wanted to have. So I wasn't thinking about shelf life. I was just making what I wanted to have and making it good that I could play.
I don't think any of us were thinking of the future. I think it was more like, this sure beats a real job.
Yeah, I mean, you got to figure most of us at the time were in our mid to late 20s, and wow, we're getting paid to make games, you know, past that journal period. It was pretty much, you go in the arcade room, you play a couple of games of Defender and Missile Command, and then you go back to your code, and pretty much that we didn't think about the future. We just thought that, I got an idea for another one, and you just work on that. Because once you got your first game out there, you're pretty much able to work on what you want in most cases. Like I was working on real sports volleyball, and I'm sitting there in this large lab in my tank top and thongs, and 5 marketing people come in their black suits, and they say, you got a round ball yet? And I say, well, not yet. And a couple weeks later, they come shuffling in again, about 5 minutes. You got a round ball yet? And, yeah, all right. But we didn't think that.
Well, along those lines, you know, at Atari, we had Atari arcade games scattered around the hallways, I mean, in every corner. And if you
research,
a
lot of research.
and you played 3-hour session of Super Breakout, nobody even looked at you twice because we're getting better at Super Breakout. In fact, the question was asked earlier of how were games assigned. There were a couple occasions where we had tournaments on the arcade games to decide who was good enough, who was the best player, who would do the 2600 version of those games.
And the salary for established that way.
player.
Yeah, the highest score on Defender, or no, the actual score on Defender. I think it was the season countdown and Georgia Fish. And that was, where is it? How about my scores and stuff? Now this is second year story, I don't know if that but
One more thing. As David said, we had to live deep in our obsessions for 6 months at a time. We didn't come up for air every 6 months. So think about the future. That was so far from where we were. We were so embroiled in our own projects. There just wasn't time or desire.
This is a very short question, but as programmers and creative types, for any of you, do you get more satisfaction? Do you prefer to be given a blank sheet of paper and told, go program something to do this, or be given a fully written program with a bug and be asked to fix the bug?
both.
I like this blank sheet.
Going through other people's code is always weird. You learn a lot, but you are going through other people's code. I mean, the way I program my program is done, one line, next line test, so I kind of know what everything's doing. And when all of a sudden something weird happens, generally what I just done. But actually, not when somebody else is doing it, debugging, that's another interesting process. But I'd rather have a blank sheet.
Well, I found the most efficient way to work is never leave your bugs till tomorrow. I mean, you write a section of code and there's a bug, you know which section of code the bug's in, right? So you fix it right then and there.
If you're testing it enough.
Well, I mean, you write the joystick routine and you push the joystick to the right and that runs to the left. I mean, you fix it right then and there. And I try to make sure that the code that I've entered that day all works, because if you put that off, you don't know where to look necessarily. But we sat at dinner last night and told some of the most obscure bug stories that we had ever encountered, and those were the more fun stories than any other aspect. So
Not at the time.
Not at the time. And one debugging session with my partners in New Jersey from California, I was on the phone for 12 hours, and we fixed the bug. But it was just, there were so many nightmares. But bugs are fun to talk about afterwards. Once you find them.
I can't see that well back here. As a programmer's designer, it's from concept to finished product. Have you ever got halfway through your game and thought, wait a second, I don't know if this is going to be fun? If that ever happens, what do you do? You come up with the concept, you add anybody.
Well, it's a good question, and it actually applies. It's kind of a phase 2 on the last question. One of the most difficult things to do in the world is to come up with a game idea from a blank sheet of paper. I mean, you got to have some inspiration. I mean, the story I tell about freeways. I was at CES and saw a guy trying to cross 8 lanes of traffic. To me, there's an idea for a video game. Cars go this way, guy goes that way. So it's really very difficult to start out with just a blank sheet of paper. The 2600 era was actually easier in some ways because the hardware led us in a direction. If you said, well, the only thing I can do, or I would sit down and say, well, here's a new idea. I can make a car, the Grand Prix car, that's this big and got all these colors and I can use that. Well, obviously it's facing this direction, so it's a side view racing game, and you work from the game from then. So quite often there are reasons that you go in a certain direction. But the question is, have you ever started a game, got halfway through it, and found it's not fun? What do? That's happened to me a number of times. I don't know if the guys have them here in the museum or anything, but I created this beautiful motorcycle on 2600, and it had independent suspension and things that bounce around. So since it could bounce around, I had to put it on bouncy terrain, so it became a dirt bike. And I worked through all this, and I was into 4K bytes and using every object that the 2600 had on the screen, and I said, well, this is boring. I mean, you're just riding this dirt bike around and scoring and doing that, you know. And I literally could not find anything to do with it that was fun. I could have thought of a lot of things to do with it, but the hardware was done. The hardware was all used up. There was nothing else, and no other objects I could put on the screen, but, you know. So that literally went on the shelf. It never became a game. I hacked on it, tried to make a game out of it, and I said, this is never going to be fun, throw it away, and put it on the shelf. Maybe 6 months later, I was in the middle of trying to figure out another game, and I said, let me get that motorcycle back out again. And this time I put it in a stadium. And I used the Activision Rainbow and the stadium lights that I used in Decathlon, and I had this motorcycle going. I used the dragster shifting and accelerating, and you get this motorcycle going, and you hit a ramp, and you fly, and you land 65 feet or 163 feet or whatever, that's your score. Boring. I mean, you know, it was all really well and good, but there was no reward. There was nothing at the end. Another game. It literally could have gone out as a 2600 game, and it just wasn't fun. I tried everything I could think of to make it fun, you know, put it on the shelf. So it's happened a lot of times. And I'll give you an example that worked out. I always wanted to make a little running man on a TV screen, and I started doing it years before Pitfall. I had a cops and robbers game where the cop would run in a cop running and a robber running, and they go through buildings, and not fun, not fun, not fun, put it on the shelf. And every game, when I finished the game and I was starting to think about what to do next, I said, let me get that little running man out here again. You know, I got a little running man out, and I tried this and I tried that. The fourth time I did it, I said, well, let's put the little running man on a path in the jungle and search for treasures, and that became Pitfall. So, you know, they go on the shelf, sometimes you bring them back, but there are a number of times in the history of Activision that I had to shelf products, 6 months of work, throw it away, and never came back. And I think another publisher might have just put it out anyway.
Atari?
No.
So I actually wanted to follow up on that a little bit more. When we did titles, we had a commitment. There were maybe some of them that weren't as fun as they could have been, that maybe if they were at Activision, there might have been a little bit more oversight, and maybe they wouldn't have been out, something like that.
I don't know how our time is. John, anybody around?
I just had a question for those of us who don't know. Tell us what you all do today. Still in the game business, right?
I'm still programming in the ESI.
I'm mostly doing web design, and I recently started doing the BlackBerry apps.
The last 6 years, I've mostly been working on mobile applications in the Linux world, either at Palm or its follow-on, stuff like that. But I was also going to do one quick marketing segment here too. The folks at Atari Age got some of my old sources for doing templates on 5200, and they called up and wanted some advice on how to finish it. And lo and behold, I'm now finishing it, so I'm actually doing a 5200 game that's on display on.
Well, I've been doing games since 1977, and I'm still doing them. Gary Kitchen and I started a company back in '95 called Skyworks, where we did advert gaming, and instead of console games, we did in the browser games. And we sold that last year, and have recently started a new publishing company called Appstar Games, and we're doing iPhone and iPad.
How many games now, Dave?
Over 70.
Do any of you know who was responsible for designing the keyboard on the Atari 400?
Waterproof though, right? Well, I mean, they had to have a lower price option because people weren't buying the players at 800. So, oil can keyboard is a lot cheaper.
I think that was the designed after the Commodore pad. That also had the triple keyboard and the small screen.
But he's not here, you can't turn him.
Oh, back there. Arm wrestling board, I don't know. You, the hat.
Okay. First, I have a question, but first I want to say something. My name is Elliot Thomas. I'm probably the only guy in the world who likes CT. Maybe that's something to do with my name, but anyways, are the stories that you buried millions in Nevada or in Mexico or landfill, is that really true, or is that just an urban myth? And if it is true, where's that landfill?
Alan Gordo.
Well, Howard Warshaw definitely wants to find out about that. He wants to prove it. He wants to literally see these things come out of the ground. I don't know the whole story behind it. Dave informed me last
The
night.
issue came up at dinner last night, and I defended Atari because it's real easy to, yes, there were millions of games buried in landfill. I mean, they were thrown away as garbage, but there was a perfectly logical reason. You know, ET sold 1 million copies in the first month, and 900,000 of them were returned to Atari as defective. Because I remember when I played it, I mean, you move the guy 1 pixel, he falls in a hole and the game's over. There was something that people didn't understand, and so they were returned to the store as defective, and the stores made Atari take them back as defective. So they went into the corner of the warehouse. Now Atari built 8 million of them, or whatever, however many did they build. So every time a new order came in, they sent the new ones from the new area. They took the old ones that were returned as defective, knowing they probably weren't defective, but they can't resell them unless they run them through the production line again to do them as a refurbished and probably sell them as a refurbished and whatever. And they had so many brand new ones, they're not going to spend money fixing the old ones. So eventually, you've got all these new ones, and you'll keep the new ones, but you got millions of them to throw away in the landfill. So I mean, it was really just, it wasn't cost effective to sell a broken, quote unquote broken thing. And so, yeah, they went to landfills, but I don't know where that is, I'm sorry.
Guys, last question?
Last question, all right.
My wife likes ET too.
Okay, Howard.
I want to know what your favorite game is. Play Lily, not necessarily by accident. And what you think is the most technically
So the question was,
What's your favorite game of any manufacturer, and what's the most technically impressive game you would list? Start at the left.
Well, I have two favorites. One is the original Missile Command game, like Daytoyer, the arcade game, and the Daytona in the arcades as well. I guess technically the Daytona with the hydraulics and
I'm a Heroes fan, so that's probably the game I like the best. I've got hundreds, thousands of hours of that. And technical stuff has got to come from Dave. I think his 2600 board, especially moving 6-gear, absolute genius, unbelievable.
see, Tempest, I always like Tempest, but also depends what day you ask me. Tempest, and I liked a lot of kart race games, and games. I like the, you know, my 600 is one of my favorites is actually, I like Sequest.
My answer to that question, I've asked that question a lot. My answer is, I'm still working on games every day, so my favorite has to be the one I'm working on today, or I won't work till midnight on it. But that's a cop-out. I mean, I actually enjoyed the C64 Transformers game that I did. It was just, there were so many obscure things in it that made it fun for me. But that actually was a fun game to play. But, and technologically, I don't know, 2600 Grand Prix was, I'd love to have the time to explain some of the technology in there.
So my favorite thing to do research on back in the car days was Gravatar.
Research meaning playing the game.
Yeah. But now I am that dad that you need the dad handicap switch for. My son pretty well murders me on things. So I like things like Myst when it was around because it was something that the whole family could do together. And the graphics on the stuff that's out today is just unreal. Gods of War, I think, in today's world. One of those games I can get murdered on.
And of course, all the grants I thought.
Thank you, everyone.